Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Pauper. That's right, we got another Pauper deck tech thingy, and today we're going to be talking about Burn. That's right, mono red Burn. Everyone loves Burn, right? Everyone just loves playing your mountains, playing your burn spells. I mean, this is like the first sort of deck that people end up playing when they're first starting, like playing Magic in general. Is this idea is like, oh man, like I can destroy their life total directly, and by the time you know it, they have every shock variant known to man and bunch of volcanic hammers and incinerates and stuff, and you're off to the races. But typically, Burn is a viable deck in really most meta games, right? Only things get kind of wonky. For example, you're not going to really be finding any Burn decks in uh, EDH, right? I mean, obviously there are some, sort of red decks where you can use like impact tremors and stuff like that to deal a lot of damage to other people, but you don't have the same sort of focus on efficiency just because, the burn spells weren't developed to deal with 120 total, life. It's a little wonky. But in formats like Pauper, of course, we do see Burn as a viable deck, and it's played quite a bit, and it's pretty sweet. And why do people play Burn? Well, A, because it's very consistent. Very consistent. You got a bunch of mountains, and you got a bunch of burn spells, and maybe some number of creatures. That's probably the greatest quality of the deck, is that it is so consistent and it is very redundant. Its consistency comes from its redundancy, of course. So that's pretty sweet. And it's pretty easy to play too, so this is also another reason why it's a good deck for new players to play, because there is a fairly high floor. Like, you can't really screw up pointing burn spells at things too often, so it has a fairly high floor, although of course, there's always room for improvement to up your game and get better with the deck and more skilled and understand sequencing and play patterns a little better. As well as there are some nice upgrades from some new sets. Of course, Skewer came out, and is that Ravnica Allegiance or Guilds Ravnica? I don't remember, but it was a fairly new set a couple years ago. So yeah, and some other newer things from just a couple sets ago, so that's pretty sweet. So yeah, but typically, what does Burn aim to do? Really, it focuses on efficiency these days. It's not like the old slide decks, which were, you know, um, had things like Curse Scroll and stuff like that, and could play a little bit of a longer game or do things like that. Now it's mostly just focus on efficiency, so even at the expense of versatility. So, for example, something like Lava Spike, which is 1 mana, 3 damage. But it's only to a player, right? So you lose out on the ability to hit creatures, but 1 mana, 3 damage, and most of the time you want to be throwing these upstairs. That's typically the best way to do it. I mean, again, typically, obviously you're going to come across situations where Lava Spike isn't cutting it because you have a creature that needs to die in play. But that's in general, you're focusing on efficiency. The best damage to mana ratio, it's a big thing. Um, which I guess I should say at this point, I really, really, really do not like Skewer the Critics. There's just a lot of times, especially before some of these new cards that we'll get to, that really did help Skewer quite a bit. There was just a lot of times where Skewer would just be an open fire, right? 3 mana burn spell, a bad Carbonize or something, and that feels real bad. That feels real bad. So yeah, I really dislike Skewer. I hate it. I guess you could say I hate it. But obviously it is a lot of the time a 1 mana 3 damage burn spell. But you know what? Let's just go ahead and get to the deck. Okay, and so there you go. We got 17 lands with a singleton Forgotten Cave. This is, pretty easy, pretty free to include. The one of you're never really going to draw, at least like in your opening hand typically. And of course, when you do draw it in the mid to late game, you can, of course, cycle it away. Very sweet, very sweet. You also don't want too many of these sort of style effects because it can screw up Fire Blast, right? Because Fire Blast needs 2 mountains to sack, so you can't really play too many Forgotten Caves, you know. So one is probably free, but any more than that can be pretty awkward and screw up your sequencing, obviously, because it comes into play tapped. But again, most of these cards are pretty obvious. We'll get to some of the maybe less obvious ones, or the ones that I really want to talk about. But yeah, most of the stuff like Chain Lightning, Lava Spike, Lightning Bolt, Fire Blast, these kind of things, all pretty obvious why we're playing them, right? Damage to mana ratio is really good. Obviously, Fire Blast is 0 mana for damage, although it has, of course, its own restrictions, certainly. But yeah, really, really pretty sweet stuff. I mean, very consistent. Look at all these cards. I mean, just it's all for us, baby. That's the way we like it, and that's how I like my decks. All right, so let's look at some of the more less obvious cards. So for burn spells, first and foremost, Searing Blades. Now everyone probably knows what this card is, but this card is awesome. I mean, pretty much every deck, or a good portion of the decks in Pauper are going to play a bunch of creatures, and Searing Blades is nutso. Absolutely nutso. When this card is good, it is insane. Like absolutely insane. Like you don't have to have the situations where it's like, oh, do I kill their creature or do I go face? I don't know. It's just like just play a land and do it both. Do it both. So yeah, I love Searing Blades. This card is nuts. I can't say enough good things about this card because it's so strong. It's just so good. So obviously you're gonna have to play a little bit differently. You have to hold a land or so in hand. So that's something you want to keep in mind. But Searing Blades you can't get much more efficient, more powerful than that. This thing is sweet. Needle Drop. This card looks a little wonky, but is a good way to cycle through your deck. Um, and it's pretty easy to enable. There's some extra cards coming up we'll talk about that help you enable it. But yeah, one mana, 1 damage draw card is actually pretty good. And of course, Curse of the Pierced Heart. This is our sort of consistent sort of damage thing. So think of Roiling Vortex in like modern deck lists of Burn, or Sulfuric Vortex in like the Legacy Burn decks, or of course in the old Sly decks that played Curse Scroll. That was also a recurring source of damage. Curse the Pierced Heart, very great. I think 3 is like the perfect number because it's definitely one of those things where it's like you don't want to draw too many. You definitely don't want to draw too many because it's obviously pretty awkward mid game, especially against faster decks. So yeah, three is perfect. That feels like very, very good. All right, let's talk about a new card, and that would be Voldaren Epicure. This card is sweet. So this card does a bunch of really good stuff for this deck. And it looks really, maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe it looks a little bit mundane or just a little bit meh. This card is really sweet. Let me tell you why. First off, 1 mana, 1/1, comes into play, bam, deals the damage to each opponent. This is great. Why? Because A, it helps enable your needles, right? As well as your skewers. So that's very good. A really cheap way to do that. As well as it creates a blood token. One of the downsides, I guess, or one of the issues with playing this deck is there's very, very little card selection, right? So this blood being able to cycle away lands is so valuable in the late game, mid to late game, you know. It's only 1 to activate. I mean, this is great. I love it. I love it. Yeah, so this is such a sweet card, such a powerful card. And of course, it just beats down too. Like you can get like a couple damage from this, like just from attacking before it's killed from a sweeper or something. And then the 1 damage that it comes into play with, and then including the blood token. I mean, you're getting a lot from just a 1 mana 1/1. And yeah, so this is another good source of repeatable damage. Another piece of reach, a little bit of card filtering. I mean, this card is so good, so good. I don't know what this chick is doing. It's this like a is this like a black Sinead O'Connor vampire lady guy? I'm not sure, but I'm digging it. I'm liking whatever's going on here. So very sweet. And of course we have Thermo Alchemist. This isn't exactly a new card. I believe this was from the previous Innistrad set, but was reprinted in Midnight Hunt. But yeah, this card obviously great when you just play a bunch of spells, right? So saving up spells to before after your Thermo Alchemist becomes unsummoning sick or loses summoning sickness or whatever, and just casting a couple spells, getting free damage from it. I guess it's even kind of a decent blocker sometimes. But yeah, this thing is super sweet. Just another great way to deal extra damage. Obviously, it just can deal 1 damage each turn normally, right? Which is pretty sweet, but obviously does a lot to enable your skewers and things like that. So yeah, Thermo Alchemist, real good card, very sweet. And yeah, these are super sweet cards. Thermo Alchemist, of course, is one of the few 2-mana cards in the deck, but it does have a very outsized effect. Yeah, it's sweet. I'm a big fan. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the sideboard. We've got Gitu Lava Runner, the last version before the current version that from last month or two or so played Gitu Lava Runner main. This is a pretty sweet card, but obviously like it can just die, right? There's so many decks that just play tons of removal, and unless you already have like the stuff in your graveyard to give it haste and whatnot, like there's a good chance it just doesn't do anything really. But against matches where they don't have like a ton of removal, this could be interesting. I haven't played this in the sideboard before, but the deck obviously that I had copied or whatever off of the MTGGoldfish thing was playing some. So I don't know if this is like a new thing or if it's just something they were testing out. But yeah. And then of course we have Electrickery, which is again just a one-sided board wipe. It can 1 to a thingy or overload for 2, so that's pretty good. And of course Martyr of Ashes, which is another way to sweep up all non-flying creatures. So that's pretty sweet. Obviously you have to play a little bit differently with Martyr of Ashes. You have to save red cards in your hand. But that's not too hard actually, usually, because you can have like Fire Blast or other cards or whatever still left in your hand, so that's not too hard. And of course, Firebrand Archer. It's kind of like another Thermo Alchemist effect. Okay, yeah, basically, why would you want to play this deck? Searing Blades. The card is awesome. And of course, you can just more or less beat anything, right? Especially if those decks can, if they miss a beat or two or miss a land drop or something, they can be in pretty much any deck would be in big trouble. There are issues with things like Prismatic Strands. Prismatic Strands just like is so difficult to play around, So especially because like the deck doesn't have like a ton of instants. Like there's a bunch of sorcery speed effects. So yeah, it's just so hard to deal with. Like especially since those, the red-white decks can draw a ton of cards, and so it's like they're always going to see Prismatic Strands, and if they see 2, it's like, how do you even win? Yeah, so that's brutal. Obviously, Flaring Pain in the sideboard helps, but it only does so much, and obviously, you're only playing a couple, and you have to draw it, whereas like they're more likely to see stuff like Prismatic Strands. And like I said, not a lot of card advantage or card selection. Shoot. But this is a pretty sweet intro deck. It's a great way to learn. Very simple idea. It does what a lot of new players want to do, which is just like kill their opponent or whatever with burn spells. So it's like it sort of plays into the stuff that they want to do. It's not something like confusing or weird like a super late game like Drago control deck or whatever, where it's like you don't know like what you should be countering and stuff like that and when you should be doing stuff. Whereas like this one's pretty self-evident. So, yeah. Yep. So, pretty sweet deck, pretty obvious deck, pretty easy deck to understand. Nothing too tricky. But yep, probably the most important thing though in this deck, what are you going to do? What kind of mountains are you playing, right? I, of course, am a big fan of Alpha or beta. I like beta, you know, because I don't the alpha corners kind of freak me out a little bit. It's so weird. They're not the same as the other corners. But alpha, beta both are good. But I'm a big fan of my good friend Unglued Mountain. Very nice, very wonderful. Such a sweet, unique looking card. You know, it's very stripped down a little bit. It's not too ostentatious. So you know, this is an important thing. What kind of lands are you going to play in your burn deck, right? Are you going to play your Arabian Nights mountains if you really want to, you know, if you really want to stunt on them? You just want to like, oh yeah, look at these mountains. They're worth more than my car or something. Actually, I don't know how much Arabian Nights mountains are. I should probably look that up. But yeah, there you go. So that's pretty much it, guys. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.